The distress signal was never meant to save them. It was a formality, a final breath sent into the dark before extinction. Across the shattered edges of the Karen Alliance, worlds burned in silence. Cities that had stood for 10,000 cycles were now nothing but drifting ash. Orbital stations spun without power. Entire species vanished between one transmission and the next. The enemy did not rush. It advanced slowly, patiently, as if it already owned the future. In the last surviving command chamber, the Alliance leaders gathered around a failing star map. Each light that went dark marked another lost system. Another billion lives are gone. No one spoke. They all knew the truth. This war was over. The enemy fleet was ancient, unified, and endless. It did not negotiate. It did not retreat. Every force that stood against it was erased, not defeated. The Alliance had exhausted every option. Except one. A junior signal officer hesitated, claws trembling above the console. Admirals, there is still one channel left. Several leaders turned slowly. They already knew which one. Humanity. The word carried no hope. Only doubt. Humans were a footnote in galactic history. Late arrivals. Emotion-driven. Divided by endless internal conflicts. They had no empire, no great fleets, no ancient weapons. Worse than that, they had gone quiet. Decades ago, humanity had withdrawn from most galactic affairs. Their borders closed. Their trade vanished. Their voices faded from the councils. Some believed humans had collapsed. Others believed they had simply been forgotten. The signal officer swallowed. Protocol says we must send a general distress call to all known civilizations, including them. Silence filled the chamber. One leader gave a slow, tired nod. Send it. The message was short, honest, desperate. This is the Karen Alliance. We are under extinction-level assault. Any aid, any ships, any assistance, please respond. The transmission vanished into the void. No one expected an answer. Hours passed, then days. Enemy fleets continued their advance. Another system fell, then another. The Alliance commanders stopped checking the human channel until the sensors began to fail. At first, it was dismissed as damage. Long-range arrays had been unreliable since the war began. Radiation, debris, interference, nothing unusual. Then a deep space observatory went blind all at once. Not destroyed, blocked. Technicians rerouted feeds, adjusting filters and angles. What they saw made several of them step back from their stations. Space was wrong. Stars were missing. Not gone, hidden. Something vast was between the observatory and the light itself. The object did not reflect energy. It absorbed it, bent it, wrapped space around its mass like fabric pulled tight. The readings made no sense. It was too large. No single ship could be that size. Then another shadow appeared. Then another. The Alliance fleet scrambled into defensive positions, panic rippling through every channel. Enemy vanguard detected? No, this vector is wrong. Are these weapons platforms? By the stars, how many are there? The shadows multiplied, sliding out of the dark in perfect formation. Lines, layers, depth without end. They were not attacking. They were arriving. A senior commander whispered, voice barely audible, "Those aren't moons." As if in answer, the unknown fleet powered up. Millions of lights ignited at once. The command chamber filled with gasps and frozen silence as the sensors finally stabilized enough to show scale. Thousands of ships. No, tens of thousands. Battleships larger than Alliance capitals. Carriers wrapped in layered armor. Structures that were half vessel, half city. This was not an aid force. This was a migration. Then the channel lit up. The human channel. After decades of silence. The signal cut through every frequency, clean and strong, overriding battle noise and emergency alerts. A single voice spoke. Calm. Humans. Unhurried. This is the United Human Fleet. No threats. No demands. Just presence. The voice continued. We received your call. Alliance leaders stared at one another in disbelief. The human fleet did not advance. It did not retreat. It simply held, filling the void between the enemy and the remaining Alliance worlds. The scale alone rewrote every assumption the galaxy had ever made about humanity. Sensors kept counting ships until the numbers lost meaning. The human voice returned, steady as stone. Please mark hostile positions. A commander finally found their voice. Why you came, with all this, for a request for aid? There was a brief pause. Then the reply. We did not come with aid. Energy signatures flared across the human formation. Shields overlapped. Weapons aligned. Entire sectors of space bent under controlled gravity. We came, the humans said, to end the war. Far beyond them, the enemy fleet adjusted course. For the first time since the war began, the enemy hesitated, and every soul watching understood the same terrifying truth. The galaxy had misjudged humanity, and it was about learning the cost of that mistake. The enemy did not attack. That alone shook the galaxy more than any explosion ever could. Across command bridges and shattered stations, alien officers watched their sensors in disbelief. The ancient enemy fleet, unstoppable, merciless, precise, had slowed. Its perfect advance fractured into hesitation. Formations adjusted. Probes were launched and pulled back. Weapons remained charged but unfired. They were assessing. The Karen Alliance commanders felt a strange, unfamiliar pressure settle over their chests. Hope. It was dangerous. It had killed species before. The human fleet remained motionless, an impossible wall of steel and light stretching across the void. Ships drifted in layered depth, so numerous that targeting computers could not agree on where the formation ended. Energy fields overlapped with such precision that space itself shimmered. No wasted motion. No chaos. This was not a fleet assembled in panic. This was a fleet that had practiced this moment. Inside the Alliance command chamber, voices finally returned. How long? One leader whispered. How long have they been building this? No one answered. Because the truth frightened them. Decades ago, humanity had been everywhere and nowhere at once. Loud in councils, passionate in debate, quick to argue, quicker to leave. They had fought among themselves as often as they cooperated with others. Then, suddenly, they stopped. Human embassies closed. Trade routes went dark. Their delegates vanished from galactic politics. Patrols reported empty systems where human outposts once stood. The galaxy assumed the simplest explanation. Humanity has failed, collapsed under its own divisions, burned itself out. Another short-lived species that reached too far, too fast. No one bothered to investigate. Why would they? Now the answer hung in front of them, blotting out the stars. On the flagship of the United Human Fleet, the command deck was silent but alive with motion. Officers moved with purpose. Data flowed cleanly. No raised voices. No hesitation. At the center stood Fleet Commander Elias Rourke. He watched the enemy through layered projections, his expression calm, almost distant. Around him were humans of every background, some in military uniform, others in civilian attire marked with fleet insignia. Children were not present on the bridge, but they were on the ships. That was by design. A tactical officer spoke. The enemy fleet is scanning us. Deep spectrum. Quantum echoes. They are trying to understand what we are. Rourke nodded slightly. Let them. Another officer added. Alliance channels are flooded. They're asking for explanations. For reassurance. Give them neither, Rourke said. Not yet. He turned his gaze to a smaller display, one showing old records. Dates. Names. Forgotten agreements. Humanity was never quiet, he said softly. We were listening. When humanity withdrew from the galaxy, it was not out of fear. It was exhausting. They had begged for unity during earlier conflicts, warned of threats moving in the dark between galaxies, asked for cooperation, shared defense, mutual sacrifice. They were ignored. So humanity learned a lesson older than stars. If no one would stand with them, they would learn to stand alone. Human science turned inward, then outward, then beyond what anyone thought possible. They stopped chasing elegance and began chasing survival. They built ships that could repair themselves while under fire, reactors that fed on controlled collapse, weapons that did not just destroy targets, but denied enemies the ability to adapt. But the greatest change was not technological. It was cultural. Humanity made a choice. No more separation between soldier and civilian. No more distant colonies left undefended. No more wars where the cost was paid by the forgotten. Every human ship became a world. Families volunteered to live aboard fleets not because they were forced, but because they refused to be left behind again. If humanity fell, it would fall together. Back in Alliance space, the enemy fleet finished its scans, and it did not like what it saw. Data rippled through their command structures. Human ships did not follow standard doctrines. Their energy signatures shifted unpredictably. Their formations were flexible, organic, yet impossibly disciplined. Worst of all, human ships carried redundancies that bordered on madness. Power routed through living systems. Decision networks that adapted faster than machine logic. Layers upon layers of fail-safes designed for worst-case scenarios that had never occurred. Yet, the enemy had fought 1,000 species. None like this. On an alliance carrier drifting behind the human line, a senior admiral stared at the tactical display. "They're not just blocking the enemy," she said. "They're protecting us." Indeed, human vessels had subtly repositioned, placing their strongest shields over damaged alliance ships, drawing enemy targeting away without a single word exchanged. No orders were requested. Humanity simply acted. A message finally came from the Alliance Command, broadcast across a secure channel. "To the United Human Fleet, we did not expect this level of response." The reply was immediate. "Expectation is irrelevant," Rourke said. "Survival is not." The enemy fleet made its decision. Long-range weapons charged. Space screamed as the first volleys tore across the void. Entire Alliance defense lines would have vanished under that fire. The humans did not flinch. Human shields rose, not as individual bubbles, but as a continuous lattice. Energy slammed into it with enough force to shatter moons. The lattice held. Shockwaves rippled through the human formation. Hulls glowed. Systems strained. No ship broke formation. Human counterfire did not come immediately. They waited, letting the enemy commit, letting them reveal patterns, letting them believe, just for a moment longer, that humanity was only defending. On the enemy command level, something unprecedented occurred. Fear. Their weapons were effective. Their power was vast. Yet the humans were still there, still advancing, slowly, deliberately, closing distance inch by inch. Enemy commanders issued new orders. "Bring in the primary assault groups." From behind the main fleet, shapes emerged, warforms older than recorded history. Living machines designed to overwhelm through sheer presence. Alliance officers cried out in despair. Even now, the enemy held more. Rourke watched the new threat appear. "Good," he said. An aide turned to him, startled. "Sir, they've shown us their hand." He raised his voice, calm but carrying across the bridge. "All fleets," he ordered, "prepare Phase 1 response." Across tens of thousands of ships, human crews moved in perfect synchronization. Weapons reconfigured. Power rerouted. Entire vessels shifted roles mid-battle, transforming from carriers to artillery platforms to shield anchors. The Alliance watched in stunned silence. This was not a reaction. This was a plan. The human commander opened a channel, this time wideband, to allies, to enemies, to the galaxy itself. Humanity was underestimated, Rourke said, his voice steady. That was acceptable. We were forgotten, he continued. That was educational. The human fleet surged forward as one. But extinction, he finished, is where we draw the line. The first human weapons fired, and the void learned a new meaning of the word war. The enemy's forward assault group vanished in a storm of controlled gravity and light, torn apart before their formations could adapt. For the first time in millennia, the enemy screamed across open channels, and the galaxy understood something it should have realized long ago. Humanity had not gone silent. Humanity had been preparing. The galaxy had always believed progress was loud. Empires announced themselves with banners and broadcasts. New weapons were paraded through star systems. Power, the galaxy thought, had to be seen to be real. Humanity had learned otherwise. As the enemy's forward assault group collapsed into fragments of molten metal and torn gravity, Alliance commanders watched in stunned silence. Tactical displays struggled to keep up. Enemy units were not merely destroyed. They were unmade, their formations collapsing as if the rules they relied on no longer applied. What kind of weapons are those? An Alliance officer whispered. No one answered, because even now, the humans were not explaining. The United Human Fleet continued its advance, slow and deliberate, like a closing tide. Human ships rotated through precise arcs, exchanging positions without breaking formation. Damaged vessels slid backward into the safety of overlapping shields, replaced instantly by fresh hulls. There was no panic, no chaos, only control. On the enemy command layer, confusion spread. Their doctrines were ancient, perfected against thousands of civilizations. They adapted to new threats quickly, usually within minutes. But humanity was not presenting a single pattern. Every time the enemy adjusted targeting, human ships shifted roles. When energy weapons were emphasized, human defenses hardened. When kinetic strikes followed, gravity fields bent trajectories away from vital zones. The enemy was reacting. Humanity was dictating. On Fleet Commander Rourke's bridge, a strategic officer spoke quietly. Enemy analysis cycles are spiking. They're trying to find a weakness. Rourke nodded. They won't. Sir. Because we didn't build one system, he said. We built a philosophy. Long before this war, humanity had studied the rise and fall of every known galactic power. They saw the same flaw repeated again and again. Centralization. Empires relied on single points of failure. Flagships, thrones, homeworlds. If those fell, everything else followed. So humanity removed the concept entirely. There was no human capital ship that mattered more than another. No irreplaceable command node. No planet whose destruction would end them. Every ship was command-capable. Every crew was trained to lead. Every loss was expected and accounted for. As the human fleet advanced, Alliance sensors detected something else. Hidden signals, deep beneath the noise of battle. More human structures, buried in the dark between stars. What are those readings? An Alliance technician asked. They're shipyards, another replied slowly. But they're not in normal space. They're folded, anchored to nothing. The realization hit like a physical blow. Humanity had not just built a fleet. They had built an infrastructure that could not be found unless activated. For decades, while the galaxy argued and postured, humans had hollowed out dead systems, collapsed rogue stars, and used their remains as anchors for construction zones hidden from every known skin method. They did not hide because they were afraid. They hid because secrecy bought time. Time to prepare for enemies that had not yet arrived. Back on the battlefield, the enemy launched its next wave, adaptive warforms that shifted shape mid-flight, shedding destroyed segments and reassembling as they advanced. These wars ended in hours. Human weapons adjusted, but not automatically. Human gunners waited until the warforms thought they had adapted, until their behavior stabilized, until they committed fully. Then the humans changed tactics entirely. Instead of destroying the warforms, human ships began isolating them, cutting off support, trapping them in localized gravity wells where time itself slowed unevenly. The warforms fought harder and burned themselves out. Alliance officers stared in disbelief. They're letting the enemy defeat itself, someone murmured. No, another corrected. They're teaching them that aggression has a cost. On one human vessel, deep in the formation, a civilian woman watched the battle from a reinforced observation deck. She held her child close, fingers tight, but steady. Is it dangerous? The child asked. Yes, she said honestly. Are we going to run? She shook her head. No. Why? She looked out at the fleet, at the countless ships flying in perfect unity. Because this is where we stand. That answer echoed across every human ship. Humanity no longer believed in distant safety. Safety was something you built, together, in the open. The enemy finally committed its main force. The void darkened as their core fleet emerged, larger than anything before it. Massive constructs, bristling with weapons that had cracked civilizations like brittle shells. Alliance morale plummeted. This is it, an Alliance general said quietly. That's what destroyed our inner systems. Rourke watched the new threat approach. Status? He asked. Enemy core fleet within engagement range in 4 minutes. An officer replied. Alliance fleets will not withstand first contact. Rourke did not look away from the display. Then they won't take it. He tapped a control. Activate ARC protocol. Across the human fleet, internal bulkheads shifted. Entire sections of ships reconfigured. Civilian habitats sealed and reinforced, then moved, sliding deeper into armored cores designed to survive direct hits from starkiller weapons. Human ships did not protect civilians by keeping them away from war. They protected them by making them untouchable. The enemy opened fire. Space detonated. The first salvo was beyond catastrophic. Energy torrents that could vaporize planets slammed into the human front line. Several ships vanished. Alliance screams filled the channels. Then the human formation tightened. Where ships were lost, others moved seamlessly into place. Shields overlapped. Gaps disappeared. Energy dispersed across the lattice instead of focusing on individual hulls. Human losses were real, but they did not cascade. On the enemy's side, confusion returned. This level of fire should have broken any defense. It hadn't. Rourke gave the next order. Release the anchors. Deep within human-controlled space, hidden structures awakened. Massive constructs that had never moved since their creation began to shift. Artificial gravity wells are locked onto distant points. Human ships responded, adjusting vectors with impossible precision. Alliance sensors struggled to interpret what was happening. "Sir," an Alliance analyst said, voice tight, "the humans are pulling the battlefield." They were. Humanity had learned that terrain mattered, even in space. By manipulating localized gravity fields tied to their hidden anchors, the humans began reshaping engagement zones. Enemy fleets found themselves dragged into kill corridors they had not chosen, their formations stretched and distorted. Human fire followed. Focused. Relentless. Enemy ships began to fall in numbers that could not be ignored. For the first time, Alliance channels filled with something other than despair. "Oh, they're not just fighting," an admiral whispered. "They're redesigning the war." On the enemy command layer, emergency protocols activated. This battle was no longer acceptable. Losses were exceeding projections. Adaptation was failing. A final calculation was made. If humanity could not be outmatched, they would be erased. The order went out. Prepare the extinction weapon. Alliance sensors caught the buildup instantly. "No," someone breathed. "They're powering it." A weapon older than the galaxy's recorded history. One designed not to win battles, but to end them by removing stars themselves. Alliance leaders turned to the human channel in panic. "Human fleet, if that weapon fires, entire systems will die." Rourke's response was immediate. "Understood." There was no fear in his voice, only resolve. He looked around the bridge. At officers. At crews. At people who knew exactly what the next phase meant. "Humanity prepared for this," he said quietly. He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships," he ordered, "prepare to hold." Not evading. Not retreat. Hold. Across the united human fleet, crews acknowledged the order without hesitation. Human ships moved forward, toward the forming superweapon. Alliance officers watched in horror. What are they doing? They're placing themselves in its firing path. Rourke's voice carried one last time, calm and unshaken. "Humanity learned long ago," he said, "that survival without purpose is just delay." The enemy's extinction weapon reached critical charge, and the human fleet did not move away. They moved together. Into the fire. The extinction weapon fired. There was no warning flare. No dramatic surge of light. Reality simply failed. Space ahead of the enemy core fleet collapsed inward, folding like paper caught in an invisible fist. A silent wave tore outward, crushing radiation, matter, and energy into a single expanding front. Stars caught in its path dimmed, then vanished, their fusion cores smothered in an instant. Alliance sensors screamed and died. Every predictive model ended with the same result. Total annihilation. On Alliance bridges, commanders shouted orders that no longer mattered. Engines flared. Ships tried to scatter, to flee the impossible force racing toward them. They would not make it. Between the weapon and the fleeing Alliance worlds, the united human fleet held its line. Human ships did not run. They advanced. Impact in 12 seconds, a human officer reported calmly. No panic. No raised voices. Just preparation. Fleet Commander Rourke stood motionless as the void ahead twisted into something wrong. The extinction wave was not energy in any form humanity recognized. It was absent, an erasure of physical law itself. "Final confirmation," Rourke said. "All civilian cores sealed." "Yes, sir." "All arc compartments secured." "Confirmed." "All fleets synchronized." A brief pause. Then, across tens of thousands of ships, the same word returned. "Ready." Rourke closed his eyes for half a second. Then hold. The first human ships were hit. They did not explode. They simply ceased. Entire vessels vanished without debris, without heat, without sound. Space where they had existed snapped shut behind them like a wound sealing itself. Alliance observers cried out in horror. They're being erased. More human ships disappeared as the wave continued forward. And still, the fleet did not break. Instead, something impossible happened. As ships vanished, their power did not. The energy they carried, reactors, shields, stored mass, was released not outward, but sideways, captured instantly by neighboring vessels through pre-aligned conduits of force and gravity. The human formation tightened. Where ships were lost, others absorbed their strength. Humanity had designed for this. They had planned for ships to die. On the enemy command layer, alarm spread. The extinction wave was meant to reduce resistance with every passing moment. Instead, resistance was condensing. Human ships closer to the wave grew brighter, stronger, their shields thickening into luminous walls. Space around them warped as overlapping gravity fields reinforced one another. The extinction wave slowed. Barely, but enough to be noticed. Alliance sensors flickered back to life as human signal boosters forced coherence through the chaos. "What are they doing?" an Alliance admiral whispered. "They're feeding on it," another replied, voice shaking. "They're using their own losses to strengthen the line." Humanity had learned a brutal truth long ago. If loss was inevitable, then loss must matter. The extinction wave reached the heart of the human formation. At its center, entire flotillas were sacrificed in seconds. Thousands of lives ended without ceremony. But the wave did not reach the Alliance worlds. It faltered. Then it began to fracture. Human gravity anchors, those hidden constructs buried in folded space, activated at full power. They pulled, twisted, and stretched the wave, forcing it to disperse across vectors it was never meant to encounter. The extinction weapon screamed, not with sound, but with instability. On the enemy bridge, something unthinkable occurred. A commander issued a retreat order. It was ignored. The weapon could not be shut down fast enough. Its own energy had become trapped between human defensive fields and distorted space. Feedback cascaded through enemy systems. The wave collapsed inward, toward its source. A section of the enemy core fleet vanished as their own weapon consumed them. Silence fell across the battlefield. Not peace. Shock. Alliance ships drifted, stunned, alive when every prediction said they should be dead. Human ships still held formation, but the cost was undeniable. Where tens of thousands of vessels had once stood, there were now gaps, dark scars in the void where lives had ended. On a damaged Alliance cruiser, a junior officer whispered, They didn't even try to save themselves." Her captain shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "They tried to save us." Across open channels, human ships began transmitting short bursts, status checks, confirmations, names. Names, not serial numbers, not unit designations. Names of ships, names of crews, names of the fallen. Each acknowledgement was met with a simple reply. "We remember." On the enemy side, panic spread. The extinction weapon was their final answer, their ultimate certainty, and it had failed. Worse, it had failed because the humans had anticipated it. Enemy fleets began to withdraw, breaking formation for the first time in recorded history. Rourke watched them turn away. "Do not pursue," he ordered. Several officers looked at him in surprise. "Sir, they're vulnerable. We could end this now." Rourke shook his head. "Not yet." He gestured to the tactical display, now showing the devastation left by the extinction wave. "We show them what survival looks like," he said. "Then we show them why extinction is no longer an option." He opened a wideband channel again. To the enemy. To the galaxy. The battlefield fell silent as his voice carried through the void. "You used a weapon designed to erase us," Rourke said evenly. "It failed. You believed loss would break us," he continued. "It forged us." Human ships began to move, not in attack formation, but in reconstruction. Drones deployed. Energy fields stabilized broken space. Alliance vessels were pulled from danger and repaired mid-drift by human support craft. The enemy watched in disbelief. Humanity was rebuilding the battlefield while the war was still ongoing. "We are still here," Rourke said, "and we are not finished." Behind the human lines, something new began to arrive. Not ships. Structures. Massive frames unfolded from folded space, assembling themselves with terrifying speed. Shipyards, mobile, armored, alive, began producing replacement vessels during the battle. Alliance sensors struggled to process it. They're replacing losses already. They're turning casualties into momentum. The enemy fleet completed its withdrawal to extreme range, regrouping in fear and confusion. They had unleashed their ultimate weapon, and humanity had answered by enduring it. On one battered human ship, A young engineer stared at an empty station where her partner had stood moments before. She wiped her eyes, hands steady as she rerouted power to the next shield layer. "We hold," she whispered to no one. Across the fleet, the same words were spoken. The sky had tried to break them. It had failed. And for the first time since the war began, the galaxy realized something that could never be forgotten. Humanity did not fear extinction. They had already planned for it. And that made them unstoppable. The battlefield did not celebrate victory. It mourned. The space where the extinction wave had torn through reality was still wrong. Light bent in slow spirals. Radiation hummed like a distant echo. Entire regions of the void remained scarred, silent proof of a weapon that should never have existed. Human ships drifted in disciplined formation, their lights dimmed. Not damaged. Dimmed by choice. Across the united human fleet, no music played. No victory signals sounded. Weapons cooled, but shields remained raised. Repair drones moved with quiet efficiency, sealing hulls, stabilizing space, pulling survivors from debris fields that should not have existed. The Alliance fleets watched, unsure how to react. They had survived, but survival felt heavy. On the bridge of a battered Alliance flagship, Admiral Kether stared at the gaps in the human formation, vast, unmistakable absences where ships once stood. "How many did they lose?" he asked quietly. An aide checked the shared tactical feed, then hesitated. We don't know. The human data doesn't list losses the way ours does." Kether frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're not reporting numbers," the aide said. "They're reporting names." The screen shifted, filling with human transmissions flowing across open channels. Not speeches, not proclamations. Names. Ship names. Crew acknowledgments. Short messages sent fleet-wide, spoken aloud on bridges and corridors. "We remember the Atlas Line. We remember the crew of Horizon Wake. We remember the families of Emberfall." Each message was answered the same way. "We remember." No one rushed them. No one hurried the process. The enemy fleet, now distant and silent, watched from beyond effective range. Their formations were broken. Their confidence shattered. Yet they did not flee entirely. They waited, as if afraid to move. Fleet Commander Rourke stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the quiet void. The battle noise had faded, replaced by the low hum of systems returning to steady state. An officer approached, careful not to interrupt the silence too abruptly. "Sir," she said, "all Alliance vessels are stabilized. Casualty estimates, they're far lower than projected." Rourke nodded once. "Because we paid the difference." The officer swallowed. "Yes, sir." She hesitated. "The Alliance leadership is requesting a private channel. They want to thank us." Rourke's jaw tightened slightly. "Not yet," he said. "They need to see this." He gestured toward the drifting human fleet. Understanding comes before gratitude. Across human space, the loss was being felt in real time. Not through statistics, but through empty seats, silent corridors, unreturned acknowledgments. On one ARC ship, a teacher stood before a group of children in a reinforced habitat ring. The artificial sky above them glowed softly, hiding the reality outside. "Why are the lights dim?" one child asked. The teacher knelt to their level. "Because we are remembering people who stood so we could stay." "Are they gone forever?" The teacher paused, choosing honesty over comfort. "Yes," she said, "but what they gave stays." The child nodded, accepting it in the simple way only children could. "Then we should remember them extra hard," the child said. The teacher smiled through tears. "Yes, we should." Back at the front, the human fleet began a slow reconfiguration. Replacement ships assembled by the mobile shipyards slid into formation, not to erase the gaps, but to support the wounded edges. The empty spaces remained. Intentional. Alliance commanders noticed. "They're not closing ranks," Admiral Kether observed. "They're leaving the gaps visible." "Why would they do that?" another asked. Kether understood before the words left his mouth. "So no one forgets the cost." The enemy fleet finally broke its silence. A transmission cut across long-range channels, alien, cold, and tightly controlled. "Humanity," the message began. "You have demonstrated unacceptable resilience." Alliance officers braced for another threat. Rourke did not. He allowed the message to continue. "Your actions have altered probability models beyond acceptable margins," the enemy said. "You are no longer categorized as a manageable variable." Rourke almost smiled. The enemy continued, Withdraw. Accept isolation. This conflict does not require your extinction. Across alliance channels, disbelief spread. They're offering terms? Rourke responded calmly. Your models are outdated, he said, and your offer is insufficient. The enemy paused, a rare thing. What do you want? They asked. Rourke turned, facing the camera directly. An end, he said. Not to this battle. To the pattern. You consume civilizations, he continued. Erase them. Move on. We have seen this before. We will not allow it to continue. The enemy's reply was sharp. You cannot police the galaxy. No, Rourke agreed. We can't. Behind him, the human fleet shifted subtly. Gravity fields realigned. Weapons warmed, not aggressively, but visibly. But we can stand in the way. Silence stretched. Then the enemy made a mistake. They laughed. A harsh, alien sound transmitted without disguise. You will break, they said. All things do. Rourke did not raise his voice. We already did, he said. And we learned from it. He ended the transmission. Across the human fleet, a new phase began. Not attack. Preparation. Long-range arrays deployed. Deep space sensors expanded outward, mapping not just the enemy fleet, but everything behind it. Alliance analysts watched the data flow in, stunned. They're not focusing on the enemy's ships, one said. They're mapping supply lines, production zones, dormant fleets. They're planning a war beyond this battle, another whispered. No, Admiral Kether said slowly. They're planning to make sure there isn't one. Humanity had not come to win a fight. They had come to change the rules. On a human medical vessel, surgeons worked silently, hands steady as they treated the wounded, human and alien alike. There were no segregated wards. No priority markers based on species. A wounded Alliance pilot looked around in confusion. You're treating us first, he said weakly. Why? A human medic did not look up. Because you're here, she replied. Word spread quickly through Alliance fleets. Humans were sharing supplies, energy, repair capacity. No contracts, no demands, just action. The effect was immediate. Alliance morale, broken for months, began to stabilize. Crews stood straighter. Ships powered up with renewed purpose. They had not just survived. They were no longer alone. Fleet Commander Rourke received a final report. The enemy fleet remains at range, an officer said. They are regrouping, but they're cautious. Rourke nodded. Good, he said. They should be. He looked once more at the gaps in the fleet, at the empty spaces where names still echoed. This is the price, he said quietly, and it will not be paid twice. Behind the scenes, human strategists activated contingency plans layered years deep. Signals were sent through channels no one else knew existed. Far beyond the battlefield, human health systems stirred. Dormant fleets powered up. Arc ships altered course. Entire populations prepared for movement. Humanity was not escalating. They were committing. The enemy thought they had seen the worst humanity could endure. They were wrong. They had only seen what humanity was willing to lose. What came next would show what humanity was willing to do. And that realization began to spread through the galaxy like a rising tide of fear and awe. Because if humanity had paid this price without hesitation, then whatever followed would be something no civilization had ever faced before. The enemy thought they had found the limits of humanity. They were wrong. Beyond the scarred battlefield, far past the range of conventional sensors, space began to change again. Not violently, not suddenly, purposefully. Alliance long-range arrays picked up the first anomaly, an echo without a source. Then another. Then hundreds. Gravitational ripples stacked over one another, precise and controlled, like footsteps echoing through the void. An Alliance analyst froze at his station. Admiral, this isn't enemy movement. What is it then? Someone asked. The analyst swallowed. It's arrivals. The enemy fleet reacted instantly. Formations tightened. Weapons charged. Probes launched in every direction. What they detected shattered their confidence completely. Jump signatures lit the darkness. Thousands of them, layered across multiple vectors, synchronized to a timing window so narrow it bordered on impossible. Then space opened. Human ships emerged in waves that seemed to have no end. Not warships first. Arcs. Massive colony vessels, some older than recorded human history, others newly forged. They were cities in motion, carrying millions of lives each. Agricultural rings glowed softly. Habitat spines stretched for kilometers. Civilian traffic flowed calmly within them, undisturbed. Behind them came defense fleets, then industrial fleets, then ships that had never been seen before, vast constructs bristling with systems that defied known classifications. Alliance command channels erupted. That's not reinforcement. That's an evacuation-scale movement. They're bringing civilians into a war zone. Admiral Kether stared at the expanding tactical map as it zoomed out again and again, trying to contain the impossible scope of what was arriving. "How many?" he asked quietly. The analyst shook his head. "Sir, I don't think 'how many' applies anymore." On the enemy command layer, panic surged. This was not how species fought wars. No civilization brought its population to the front lines. It was irrational. It was reckless. It was human. Fleet Commander Rourke watched the arrivals without surprise. He had known this moment would come since the first distress signal was received. A communications officer spoke. "All external fleets reporting in. ARC Groups 1 through 40 are in position. Civilian integration proceeding as planned." Rourke nodded. "Any dissent?" he asked. The officer hesitated. "None, sir. There were volunteers beyond capacity." Rourke closed his eyes briefly. Humanity had been given a choice long ago: spread out and hope to survive alone, or gather together and stand as one. They had chosen unity. Even now, across the human fleets, families watched the enemy from reinforced observation decks. They saw the scars in space, the missing ships, the empty places left behind. No one panicked. They had known what they were coming into. On one ARC ship, a man placed his hand against the viewport as distant stars flickered under the shadow of enemy sensors. "They look afraid," his partner said softly. "They should be," he replied. Back on the battlefield, the enemy finally sent a transmission, no longer cold, no longer confident. "What is this?" they demanded. "Why bring non-combatants?" Rourke answered without hesitation. "Because this war decides whether we exist," he said. "And existence is not a task we outsource." "You endanger them," the enemy replied. Rourke's voice hardened. "We protect them," he said, "by ending you." The transmission cut. The enemy fleet began pulling back, slowly, deliberately, attempting to draw distance, to regroup beyond the reach of the growing human presence. They failed. Human fleets did not chase. They expanded. ARC ships spread into interlocking formations, their defenses merging seamlessly with military vessels. Civilian reactors fed power into fleet shields. Industrial ships began deploying fabrication arrays, constructing new platforms in real time. Alliance observers watched in stunned silence. They're turning the population into infrastructure. They're turning survival into strategy. Admiral Kether felt a chill. "This isn't desperation," he said. "This is commitment." The human fleet now filled entire regions of space. Enemy maneuvering options vanished as corridors closed, escape vectors blocked not by weapons, but by presence. The galaxy itself felt smaller. On the enemy's side, a final council convened. Their extinction weapon had failed. Their fleets were outmatched. Their models were broken. For the first time in their history, they faced a species that did not fear loss, because loss had already been accepted. One commander voiced the thought none wanted to acknowledge. "If we escalate further," they said, "we risk mutual annihilation." Another responded coldly. "Humanity has already accepted that outcome." Silence followed. The truth settled like gravity. Humanity was not threatening destruction. They were immune to it. Rourke received confirmation from the Deep Space Command. "All human-held systems report readiness," an officer said. "Every fleet, every colony, every ARC. How many remain unaccounted for?" Rourke asked. The officer's answer was simple. "None, sir." Rourke exhaled slowly. For the first time since the war began, he allowed himself to look tired. He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All human vessels," he said, his voice carrying across millions of ships. "We have reached full attendance." Across the void, acknowledgments rolled in, not shouted, not emotional. "Steady. Ready. You were told this moment might come," Rourke continued. "That one day, hiding would no longer be enough. We are here now," he said. "Not because we seek war, but because we refuse extinction." The enemy fleet shifted again, their formations tightening inward like a wounded animal curling around its core. Alliance sensors detected massive power spikes. "They're preparing something," an Alliance officer warned. "Not a weapon. A signal. Rourke nodded. Let them speak, he said. The enemy transmission burst across all channels, raw, unfiltered. You leave us no path forward, they said. If you continue, the galaxy will burn. Rourke's reply was immediate. Then it will burn with witnesses, he said. And it will remember who lit the fire. The human fleets began their final maneuver. Not an attack, an encirclement. Entire star systems fell under human control as fleets locked into gravitational positions, forming a vast, unbroken perimeter around the enemy's remaining forces. Supply lines were severed. Escape routes collapsed. Time itself became an enemy to the enemy. Alliance commanders realized what was happening. They're not trying to defeat them quickly, Admiral Kether said. They're making sure they can't hurt anyone else. Yes, another replied. They're ending the war permanently. On the enemy command layer, fear turned to something else. Understanding. Humanity was not here to rule. They were here to make extinction obsolete. As the encirclement closed, Rourke gave one final order. Prepare for final engagement, he said. All fleets, synchronize. Behind him, the full weight of humanity, every ship, every life, every choice made in silence over decades, stood ready. The enemy had wanted a galaxy that could be harvested, erased, forgotten. They had found something else. A species that arrived not with aid, not with an army, but with everything it was. And the final act of the war was about to begin. The galaxy had always known war as motion. Advance, retreat, strike, flee. Every conflict followed the same rhythm. One side pushing, the other running, both believing that survival meant distance. Humanity ended that idea in a single moment. As the encirclement locked into place, space itself seemed to settle. The enemy fleet no longer maneuvered. There was nowhere to go. Every vector, every jump point, every gravitational corridor was occupied or controlled by human presence. Not weapons. Presence. Alliance sensors painted the picture in stark clarity. The enemy was surrounded by a living wall, layers of ships, stations, and arcs forming a perimeter so vast it could be seen across multiple star systems. The galaxy was no longer moving around the war. The war was contained. On Alliance bridges, no one spoke. They watched in silence as probability curves flattened into inevitability. This isn't a battle anymore, one officer whispered. No, Admiral Kether replied. It's a reckoning. Inside the enemy command structure, chaos reigned. Their doctrines had no answer for this. They were designed to break resistance through terror, to force flight, to win by making survival impossible. But humanity had removed flight from the equation. Human fleets did not rush the enemy. They did not bombard indiscriminately. Instead, they applied pressure, constant, precise, unrelenting. Energy supplies were disrupted. Long-range coordination collapsed. Autonomous units were isolated and neutralized one by one. Every aggressive action the enemy attempted was met with containment, not escalation. It was infuriating. It was terrifying. On the flagship of the United Human Fleet, Fleet Commander Rourke watched the enemy's systems degrade in real time. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He waited. A senior strategist spoke quietly. Enemy offensive capability has dropped below 20%. Casualties are escalating on their side. Rourke nodded. And civilian impact? Minimal, the strategist replied. We've prevented collateral loss across all nearby systems. Rourke exhaled slowly. This was the line humanity had drawn. Victory without annihilation. Across the human fleets, crews remained steady. No cheers. No chants. Only discipline and focus. This was not revenge. This was enforcement. On one Ark ship, an elderly woman watched the distant flashes of battle through reinforced glass. She had lived long enough to remember when humanity had begged for help during its own dark years. No one had answered then. Now, humanity was answering everyone. They can still surrender, a younger man beside her said. Yes, she replied. And for their sake, I hope they do. The enemy finally understood the truth they had been avoiding. Humanity was not trying to destroy them. Humanity was trying to make them stop. A transmission request came through, this time fragmented, unstable, stripped of the cold certainty that had defined every previous message. We acknowledge containment, the enemy said. We request negotiation. Alliance commanders leaned forward as one. Rourke did not respond immediately. He turned to his officers. Status across the perimeter? All human fleets synchronized, one replied. No breaches. No instability. Civilian arcs? He asked. Secure. No casualties. Rourke nodded. Only then did he open the channel. State your terms, he said. The enemy hesitated. A fatal mistake. We will cease hostilities in this sector, they said. Withdraw our remaining forces. This is sufficient. Rourke's eyes hardened. No, he said calmly. It isn't. You don't get to leave and do this again somewhere else. A ripple of unease spread through enemy command channels. You cannot exterminate us, they warned. Rourke's reply was immediate. We are not here to exterminate you. He leaned forward slightly. We are here to end the practice of extinction. Across the battlefield, human fleets adjusted formation. Not tightening. Not attacking. Clarifying. Alliance analysts saw it at once. They're presenting terms in force geometry, one said in awe. This is doctrine. The enemy demanded clarification. Rourke gave it. You will dismantle your weapons of extinction weapons, he said. All of them. Everywhere. You will open your territory to permanent oversight. You will never again erase a species. And if you refuse, the enemy asked. Rourke's voice did not change. Then this containment remains, he said. For as long as it takes. For centuries, if necessary. The implication was devastating. Humanity was willing to stay. The enemy had always relied on time, on patience, on the certainty that others would break first. Humanity has brought families, arcs, generations. They could wait longer than anyone. Inside the Alliance command, realization spread like a shockwave. They're not fighting a war, Admiral Kether whispered. They're changing the rules of existence. The enemy command layer fractured under the weight of the choice. Some factions argued for continued resistance. Others saw the truth. Extinction had finally met a species that would not allow it, no matter the cost. At last, a single message emerged, unified, stripped of arrogance. We accept oversight, the enemy said. We will dismantle the weapons. Across the battlefield, something unprecedented occurred. Human weapons powered down. Not all at once. Gradually. Deliberately. Trust, but verified. Alliance fleets watched in disbelief as enemy structures began to deactivate. Superweapon cores went dark. Ancient constructs powered down. Their purpose ended not by destruction, but by surrender. The war ended not with an explosion, but with silence. A deep, heavy silence that settled over the galaxy. For the first time in generations, stars burned without fear of being extinguished. On Alliance ships, crews stared at their screens, unsure how to feel. They were alive. Their worlds were safe. But nothing would ever be the same. Rourke remained on the bridge long after the final confirmation came through. It's done, an officer said quietly. Rourke nodded. Yes, he replied. It is. He opened one last wideband transmission. To all allied civilizations, he said, his voice steady but carrying emotion now. This war is over. Not because one side was stronger, he continued, but because we chose not to look away. Remember this day, he said. Remember that extinction was stopped, not by silence, not by isolation, but by standing together. Across Alliance space, ships powered down weapons and lit memorial beacons. Names of lost worlds were spoken aloud. Names of fallen defenders, human and alien, were recorded together. No species was separated. No sacrifice forgotten. On a distant human ark, a child watched the stars and asked a simple question. Is it safe now? A parent answered softly. Yes, they said, because someone stayed. As the galaxy began to breathe again, a new understanding settled into every civilization that had watched humanity stand where no one else had. Running was no longer an option. Ignoring was no longer acceptable. The age of quiet extinction had ended, and the age of responsibility had begun. The galaxy would remember this day not as the moment humanity won a war, but as the day went on. The galaxy stopped running from its own conscience. The galaxy did not celebrate. It paused. For generations, war had been the background noise of existence. Borders shifted. Species vanished. Councils argued while stars went dark. Survival had meant staying small, quiet, and lucky. Now the noise is gone. And in the silence, every civilization felt the same unease. What happens after extinction fails? Across Alliance space, emergency councils transformed into something unfamiliar, Reconstruction assemblies. Delegates gathered not to beg for aid or demand protection, but to understand a new reality taking shape around them. Human fleets remained. They did not withdraw after victory. They did not advance either. They stayed where they were, positioned at key corridors, damaged regions, and former extinction zones. Ships drifted in watchful orbits. Patrols moved slowly and predictably. Not conquerors. Sentinels. Admiral Kether stood before a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species. Some bore scars from the war. Others represented civilizations saved at the last moment. The humans have issued no demands, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. No tribute. No territory claims. No political authority. Murmurs spread through the chamber. That makes no sense, one delegate said. Power always demands something. Kether nodded. That's what we believe too. Across the room, a display activated, live footage of a human task force stabilizing a fractured star system. They were not extracting resources. They were reinforcing space-time distortions, repairing orbital debris, and reopening trade routes. They are rebuilding what the war broke, Kether continued, including things that were never theirs. The chamber fell quiet. Elsewhere, on the bridge of the United Human Fleet's flagship, Fleet Commander Rourke watched similar reports stream in. Systems stabilized. Refugees returned home. Trade corridors reopened under shared protection. Human crews rotated through patrols, relief missions, and reconstruction duty without distinction. Warships carried medical supplies. Ark ships served as mobile sanctuaries for displaced populations. An officer approached. Sir, multiple alliance governments are requesting clarification, she said. They're asking what comes next. Rourke nodded slowly. It's time, he said. He authorized a galaxy-wide broadcast. Not a declaration. A promise. The signal carried across every known channel, translated automatically, stripped of embellishment. This is humanity, Rourke said. We did not come to rule. We did not come to judge. We came because extinction was allowed to happen, and we decided it would not happen again. Across the galaxy, billions listened. We will maintain fleets at critical points, he continued. We will respond to threats of annihilation. We will stand where others cannot. But we will not interfere in your cultures, your governance, or your conflicts, unless those conflicts become extinct. The message was clear. Live as you choose, but do not erase one another. We ask for one thing only, Rourke said, that you remember this line exists. The transmission ended. No applause followed. No cheers. Just understanding. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed in small, quiet ways. Border wars paused, not because humanity threatened intervention, but because leaders realized escalation now had witnesses. Secret weapons programs were abandoned. Ancient doomsday devices were quietly dismantled, their creators unwilling to test humanity's resolve. For the first time in recorded history, extinction became unacceptable. On a remote world once marked for harvesting, children returned to rebuilt cities under alien skies. Human ships hovered in high orbit, barely visible, never landing unless invited. They did not stay forever, just long enough. On one such world, a local governor stood beside a human liaison overlooking a reconstructed spaceport. You could have claimed this system, the governor said. No one would have stopped you. The human shook her head. Then we'd have to defend it forever, she replied. We'd rather teach you to defend yourselves. The governor studied her carefully. Why? The human answered simply. Because one day, we might not be here. That truth echoed through humanity itself. Despite the scale of their presence, humans never pretended to be eternal. They recorded their losses carefully. Memorial beacons were established at every major engagement site. Quiet fields of light where names drifted endlessly through the dark. Human ships dimmed their lights when passing those places. Other species began doing the same. On a distant Ark ship, now anchored peacefully near a recovered Alliance world, a child traced glowing points on a star map. What are those? The child asked. Memorials, a parent replied. Places where people chose others over themselves. Were they heroes? The parent thought for a moment. They were people, they said. Who stayed? As years passed, the phrase spread. They stayed. It became shorthand across the galaxy, not just for humanity, but for a choice. To intervene. To protect. To refuse silence. The enemy civilization, stripped of its extinction weapons and placed under permanent observation, began to change as well. Not through punishment, but through constraint. Their fleets were reduced. Their doctrines rewritten under watchful eyes. They no longer erased worlds. They learned to coexist or remain contained. History recorded the war differently depending on who told it. Some called it the end of the extinction age. Others named it the day the galaxy was shamed into survival. Humanity called it something simpler. The line. The point where they decided that if the universe was indifferent, they would not be. Fleet Commander Rourke eventually stepped down. He was not celebrated as a ruler. No statues were built in his image. He returned to a quieter life aboard an Ark ship, teaching strategy to those who would replace him. When asked once if he regretted the cost, he answered honestly, yes. Then he added, but regret is cheaper than silence. Long after the fleets settled into their guardian roles, long after trade resumed and borders stabilized, the story continued to spread, passed from world to world, generation to generation. They tell it as a warning. They tell it as a promise. They tell it so no one forgets what happened when the galaxy asked for aid. And humanity answered with everything it had, not because they were the strongest, not because they wanted power, but because someone had to stand where the darkness expected no one to be. And when extinction came looking for a quiet, forgetful galaxy, it found humanity, still there, still watching, still willing to stay.